Hello, friends. I'm Professor Filip Kovacevic, and this is the 8th edition of the Russian newspaper's Monitor. I hope you are doing well today. First of all, thank you very much, very much for making our Kickstarter campaign successful. We will continue to offer you top-notch programming. Thank you for your commitment to impartial and objective journalism. I know you can't wait to find out what was covered in the Russian press this week. So let's get into it right away. We start today, as we usually do, with the Russian government-owned newspaper Rossiyskaya Gazeta. Let's see what's on the Kremlin's collective mind. We'll take a look at the front page for the edition for November 24th, 2016. On the top of the front page, there is a photo of the Russian Defense Minister, Sergei Shoigu, next to the title that says, "Military cooperation between Moscow and Beijing helps support peace in Eurasia." These are Shoigu's own words. The article continues on page 3. It reports on Shoigu's official visit to the People's Republic of China, which took place on November 23rd. The article states that the schedule of Shoigu's meetings in Beijing was extremely busy. His meetings started in the morning and ended at night. His first meeting was with Xu Xilian, who is the deputy president of the Chinese Central Military Committee. After the meeting, Shoigu said that military cooperation between Russia and China is the foundation for peace in Eurasia and beyond. He also stated that this cooperation is oriented toward confronting contemporary challenges and threats to security, the foremost being international terrorism. In addition, Shoigu said that with his Chinese host, he discussed all the global geopolitical hotspots, including Syria, Iraq, and Libya. There is no doubt that the Western intelligence agencies would have given a fortune to be or to have a fly on the wall during this meeting. After all, these are precisely the conflict zones where the United States and NATO have been heavily involved and where things are taking a negative turn for them, thanks to the joint efforts of the Russians and the Chinese. In another disconcerting move for the West, Shoigu claimed that every year the cooperation between Russia and China is getting more and more intensive. This year alone, there will be more than $3 billion worth of joint military projects and projects in military technology. More generally, Shoigu stated that Russia and China today represent balanced and responsible actors on the global political scene, and that they demonstrate this in their activities in the United Nations, the BRICS Group, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. After the meeting with Xu, Shoigu visited the Chinese Ministry of Defense and met with his Chinese counterpart, the Defense Minister, Colonel General Chan Van-Suan. The article notes that General Chan called Shoigu his old friend, and that from the friendly tone of their conversation, it was clear that they have a lot of personal respect and sympathy for each other. The Russian Deputy Defense Minister Anatoly Antonov, who was present at the meeting, later said to journalists that Shoigu and Chan talked about joint military exercises, visits of military ships, exchange of officers, and the holding of international military games in China in 2017. Antonov also stated that Shoigu emphasized that close military cooperation between Russia and China is not directed against any country in the world, but is instead a firm guarantee for the peace and security in the world. As I said on many previous occasions, this kind of close cooperation between Russia and China is a nightmare for those who want the United States to maintain global hegemony and be the policeman of the world, such as the leadership of the CFR and the Atlantic Council. This cooperation signals the crushing defeat of Kissinger's and Brzezinski's school of American geopolitics. One of the key directives of this school of thought is that in order for the United States to keep dominant position in the world, it must foment conflict between Russia and China. During the Cold War, the United States pressured China against the Soviet Union, and this was the secret underside of Nixon's and Kissinger's so-called opening toward Mao Zedong and the Chinese communists. Likewise, in the immediate aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s, when Yeltsin's Russia became a US client state, it appears that some in the United States foreign policy establishment wanted to push Russia in the war against China. Fortunately, this effort failed. And so now when Russia and China converge economically and politically in many respects, integrating vast territories, resources, and military might, there is justified panic in some Washington circles that the United States may be losing Eurasia. This is why there could take place some engineered and very serious political incidents in South and East Asia in the coming period, perhaps even as early as the next year. Now, let's take a look at the front page of Izvestia, the moderate pro-government newspaper, the edition for November 25th, 2016. In the middle of the front page, there is an article with the title, Russia is installing a global system of ocean surveillance, with the subtitle, Harmony, which is the name given to this system, will be able to discover enemy ships, submarines, and planes in any ocean of the world. Below the article, there is a color photo of 3 Russian sailors inside a submarine. The article reports that the Russian Ministry of Defense has begun installing a new and unique system of ocean surveillance, which will make transparent miles and miles of the world's oceans and make it possible to discover ships, submarines, and even planes and helicopters flying low above the water. The system functions on the basis of acoustic signals sent out by robotic entities, which are released by Russian submarines and anchored on the ocean floor. The signals will be collected by satellites and then directed to the command center in the Arctic. As I already pointed out, the name of this surveillance system is Harmony, and it is supposed to be fully operational by 2020. At this time, the Russian Federal Agency for Special Projects is working on the production of the robotic entities, which will be the backbone of the surveillance system. Also, the construction of a surveillance command center began near the Russian village of Belushaya Guba on the island of Novaya Zemlya in the Arctic. According to the article, the entire system is being built by the corporation called Almaz Antey, which has closely collaborated with the Russian military on many projects dealing with the missile defense and rocket development. The article goes in detail describing the function of the system once it is installed on the ocean floor. What is clear is that no movement or noise will be able to pass undetected. The Russian military will be informed of all and any movements of its potential opponents. According to Dmitry Kornev, who is the director of the Internet project Military Russia, the robotic entities will be carried and planted on the ocean floor by the Russian submarine for special operations called Sarov. Other submarines that might also take part in this operation are the atomic submarines Belgorod and Khabarovsk, which are being constructed at this time. The submarine Belgorod is almost finished and will be commissioned by the Russian Navy in the beginning of next year, while Khabarovsk will be constructed by 2020. The article quotes the Russian military historian Dmitry Boltenkov, who states that the entire surveillance system will be fully operational by 2020 and that Russia will be able to confront and resist any threats coming from the sea. In my opinion, this article shows to what extent the Russian government is committed to expanding the global reach of the Russian military. It is clear that the Russians are intent on diminishing the existing US supremacy in the world's oceans. Though historically, Russia has been perceived as a primarily continental power, with the application of these innovative robotic technologies and weapons, it is on the way to becoming an influential sea power as well. Now, let's go to the Nezavissimaya Gazeta, the middle-of-the-road newspaper, the edition from November 24, 2016. On the bottom left corner of the front page, there is an article with a title, "They put Russia on the same side with the Islamic State," and the subtitle, "Europe declared information war against Russia." The article reports on the recent resolution of the European Parliament, which claimed that Russian news media and analytic centers distribute not objective news, but Kremlin propaganda, and that therefore the European Union has to develop a set of countermeasures. In this manner, the resolution equates the Russian media with the Islamic State-controlled websites and video streams. However, as the article points out, the resolution was far from consensual. In fact, out of 691 deputies present during the voting, only 304, or 44%, voted yes. 179, or 25%, voted no, while 208, or 31%, abstained. In fact, the no votes and abstentions outnumbered the yes votes. But because the resolution requires only a simple majority, the yes votes to be greater than the no votes, it was passed. The resolution specifically enumerated the following organizations as the agents of the Kremlin and the tools of information war against the European Union: the RT and the Sputnik news agencies, and the Ruski Mir and Rossotrudnichestvo foundations and grant-giving programs. The article notes that the Russian officials reacted immediately. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs official dealing with human rights, Konstantin Dolgov, stated that this resolution violates the principles of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, international norms on the freedom of the press and freedom of speech, as well as the legal rights of the EU citizens. The RT, in its reaction, claimed that this resolution was the result of the personal anti-Russian prejudices of the Polish deputy Anna Fotyga, former foreign minister of Poland and a classical US agent of influence, who wrote and submitted the resolution. The European sources contacted by the newspaper said that the EU has already formed a special unit whose task it is to combat the claims of the Russian news agencies by distributing its own news with a positive spin on the EU activities and exposing what, in its opinion, are the Kremlin's fakes. The resolution not only condemned the Russian media as propagandists, equating it with the media of the Islamic State, but it also accused the Russian government of funding an army of trolls, that is, individuals who are paid to leave positive comments on the Russian-friendly news and negative and vulgar on those critical of Russia. The resolution is not binding on the member states of the European Union, and no one expects that it will lead to the banning of the Russian-produced programs. However, it is clear that the Russian media will be put under much stronger surveillance by the EU government, and the efforts will be made to diminish or even destroy its reputation in the eyes of the people. The members of the Russian parliament also reacted in defense of the Russian media in Europe. The head of the International Affairs Committee in the Duma, Leonid Slutsky, said that if there is any censorship of the RT and Sputnik by the EU, Russia will impose similar measures on the EU media in Russia. Even the Russian President Vladimir Putin entered the fray. He called the resolution the proof of the degradation of democratic freedoms in the European Union and praised the Russian media for doing an excellent job. In my opinion, the developments reported in this article show that the pro-NATO and anti-Russian EU establishment is afraid that they are losing the battle for the hearts and minds of their own citizens. Citizens all over Europe are realizing that the biggest threat to peace, stability, and prosperity comes not from Russia, but from their own corrupt political elites who have gotten rich by abusing the powers of their political offices for private gain. It seems to me that it is too late now to stop this process of citizen awakening. In my opinion, this will be made manifest next year because 2017 is the election year in many European countries, including France and Germany. If, of course, there is no breakout of another European war before that. Now, let's look at the Russian semi-tabloid press. The weekly newspaper Argumenti I Fakti, the newspaper with the largest circulation in Russia, the edition for November 23, 2016. There are no articles dealing with international politics on the front page, but on page 2, there is an article discussing the Russian President Vladimir Putin's participation at the Asian Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit held in Lima, Peru, over the weekend. The summit brought together all the major players in the Pacific region, the United States, China, Russia, and Japan. However, according to Andrei Ostrovsky, deputy director of the Russian Far East Institute, quoted in the article, the summit did not formulate any clear direction for the future development of the region. While the US President Obama lobbied for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, a multilateral trade pact that would exclude Russia and China, the president-elect Donald Trump said that one of the first things he will do when he gets into office is to withdraw the United States from further TPP negotiations. The article reports that Putin said at the summit that there are too many barriers to international trade at this time, and that they should be lifted in accordance with international rules established by the World Trade Association, the organization, the WTO. However, Putin also said that the best way to encourage economic development and growth was through regional alliances and blocs in Eurasia. And here he was obviously thinking of the Eurasian Economic Union, which includes many of the former Soviet republics in Central Asia and is headed by Russia. Putin met with the leaders of China, Peru, Vietnam, and the Philippines. The meeting with the Philippine President, Rodrigo Duterte, was particularly interesting because Duterte publicly declared his admiration for Putin. Putin also very briefly met with Obama and invited Obama to visit Russia. This invitation can be interpreted in many different ways. If we look at it optimistically, we can say that Putin holds no grudges against Obama and wants to show him the Russian hospitality at its best. However, it is doubtful that Obama will ever go to Russia again. The article mentions that Putin also met with the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. However, they made no progress on the perennial issue burdening the relations between the two countries, the issue of the southern Kuril Islands, 3 bigger islands and a group of smaller islets, which the Soviet Union took over in 1945 and which Japan wants back. Due to this issue, the two countries never signed a peace treaty and officially ended the World War II hostilities. Putin and Abe did confirm that Putin would visit Tokyo in December and that their negotiations would continue. Lastly, let's also take a look at the front page of the Russian semi-tabloid newspaper Komsomolskaya Pravda, the edition for November 23, 2016. On the front page, there is a photo of a boy waving a Russian flag, and the title asks, "Who will defend millions of Russians at the edges of the former Soviet Union?" The subtitle explains, marking the 25th anniversary of the collapse of the Soviet Union, we, meaning the newspaper, continue researching the fate of our countrymen and women in the post-Soviet space. This is the lead article in this edition of Komsomolskaya Pravda, and it takes up 2 pages, pages 8 and 9. It is based on an interview with a Russian specialist on demographics, Vladimir Timakov. Timakov states that, according to the 1989 census, about 25 million Russians lived outside of Russia in other Soviet republics. At this time, only about 14 million Russians live in those republics, which all became independent states in 1991. According to Timakov, out of those 11 million missing, 6.5 million emigrated, 6 million of them to Russia. About 2.5 million people who declared themselves Russian in 1989 changed to some other nationality. And about 2 million died in different ways, including being killed in civil war zones. For instance, during the conflict in Chechnya from 1991 until 2001, about 30,000 Russian civilians were murdered. In addition, in the former Soviet republics, the life expectancy of Russians was on average lower than the life expectancy of other ethnic groups, and they also had fewer children. On the left side of page 8, there is a graphic that shows how many Russians emigrated from various former Soviet republics and what percentage of them remained in those states after 1989. Let's just mention a few examples. The highest number of Russians emigrated from Kazakhstan, around 2,200,000. And now only 59% are left when compared to how many there were in 1989. The next republic, in terms of how many Russians emigrated, is Uzbekistan, around 850,000. And now only 39% are left out of their number in 1989. The two republics that have the least number of Russians living there compared to their numbers in 1989 are Georgia and Tajikistan. In Georgia, only 15% are left, and in Tajikistan, only 9%. It is interesting to note that for all the discrimination and abuse that Russians have suffered in the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, more than 50% of the Russians stayed. In Estonia, which borders Russia not far from the major Russian city of St. Petersburg, about 70% stayed. Timakov also points out that many Russians have also become internal migrants, moving, for instance, from the war-torn Chechnya to other Russian republics and regions. According to his research, out of 290,000 Russians in Chechnya and the neighboring Ingushetia in 1989, only 23,000 have remained. Regarding the Russian speakers in Ukraine, Timakov states that the number of Russians in Ukraine declined by 3 million from the 1989 census to the 2001 census. About 1 million moved to Russia, and the others began to declare themselves Ukrainian. Timakov explains that this came about as the result of a strong push for assimilation on the part of the Ukrainian government, especially among the younger population of the Russian language speakers. This assimilation process was also supported by the outside forces, various member states in the European Union, such as Poland, and also the United States. These outside geopolitical actors created a myth claiming that Ukraine supposedly belongs to something called the European civilization, whereas Russia does not. This was used to discriminate against the Russian culture as supposedly less civilized. It is this kind of open European racism that was a major factor in provoking a civil war in Ukraine, which is still going on. Timakov claims that the Russian government must do more logistically and financially to assist Russians outside Russia and help them to organize and fight for their rights. He states that without this support, the numbers of Russians in other former Soviet republics will only continue to decline. In conclusion, Timakov says that the good news is that the demographic situation in Russia is improving. The families are having more children, and many of those who left Russia are now coming back. It is interesting to note that a demographic boom in terms of how many babies are being born has taken place in Crimea after it was incorporated into Russia. Timakov also emphasizes that in the last 5 years, more people returned than left Russia. This kind of trend is not even found in many European Union states. Overall, according to Timakov, Russia should welcome all immigrants, but must make sure that the Islamic and other extremists do not enter the country under the cover of the refugees. As many Russian enemies in the West know well, radical Islam as an ideology has the potential to destabilize the southern regions of Russia and the post-Soviet states for many years to come. In my opinion, the aim of this article is to focus the attention of ordinary Russians on the plight of their countrymen and women in other former Soviet republics. This is done in order to create the climate of solidarity and willingness to help out those in need. At the same time, the article also affirms the strength of the Russian culture and national identity. It rouses up patriotic feelings. In addition, it is also clear that the Russian government decided to rely on the Russian minorities living outside Russia for the implementation of its geopolitical and geoeconomic agenda more extensively than in the past. I think that we will see a much more vocal defense of their rights and political demands in the coming period. Dear friends, this is all for today. Thank you for watching, and thank you once again for supporting our Kickstarter campaign and making it successful. Be cool and stay cool until the next edition of the Russian Newspapers Monitor.